Hey everybody, and welcome back to another video from Northeast Christian Apologetics. Today we are doing our Monday night book study, which happens every Monday evening at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And we are continuing our reading of The Reason for God by Tim Keller. So far we have been enjoying the book, and I think that a lot of people have, since this series is getting more views than I normally get. So if you're here live, I welcome you. And if you're watching later on YouTube, I also welcome you. Since last week, we had an exciting turn of events. You'll never believe what happened to us. We got there. We finally got there. I don't believe it. We finally got to 100 subscribers. I really appreciate you guys being with me and deciding to support this ministry through your subscription, and perhaps liking the content or sharing it or discussing it outside of the group or things of that nature. I really appreciate it. The next goal, you always got to, once you achieve a goal, you got to set a new one. The new one is going to be 150 subscribers. So beforehand, it was just like 10 subscribers and then 30 subscribers. And then I was at 30 for a long time and then went up to 50. So I think that it would be a good goal now just to put up to 150 subscribers. So I'm excited about that. But tonight we're going to be doing our The Reason for God book study, the reading. And the author of this book is Tim Keller, and he has a ministry that's called Gospel in Life, and they're doing good work. They have his sermons. I highly recommend checking out Tim Keller's sermons. They're very edifying. They're really good for you. If you remember, this is a book study, and so I encourage you to get this book. This is a handy book to have in your library so that you can reference it or, let somebody borrow it. You can get this book at christianbooks.com as well as amazon.com. Those prices may not be accurate, but the rating is stable. Excuse me. So we're going to be diving into the topic, Science Has Disproved Christianity, which is... I find this topic to be particularly interesting. So we'll see how this goes tonight. I have read The Reason for God before, but it's actually been a few years, and I kind of want this to be a react and a discuss, so I don't really read the chapters beforehand. I can't remember how Tim Keller addresses this topic, but usually Christians go about saying that, the modern scientific method is a product of the Christian worldview. The assumptions of science are more naturally or more intuitively discovered or believed in, given a Christian worldview where, we believe in a God of order, and so we would expect the nature to be orderly. We believe that the nature is separate from God, so it's not an object of worship, things of that nature, that we're made in God's image and we're made to know. And so we are intended to learn about nature and to learn about God through nature, things of that nature. So we'll be going ahead and jumping over to the book and seeing how Tim Keller, I suspect it's going to be along those lines. Anyway, if you have not already, and I know I already talked about this a little bit, but if you haven't already, consider subscribing to meet our new 150 subscriber goal. I think that's a very modest goal. There's some channels out there in which like 150 is nothing to them, but this is a very niche. The topic of this channel, the focus of this channel is a very niche focus. So it's a big for me, for sure. So if you want to be a part of that journey, I welcome you. All right, so let's go ahead and jump over to the reading. All right, so chapter 6, Science Has Disproved Christianity, and just like in other chapters, Timothy Keller starts us off with a quote that is pertinent to the discussion of the topic. All right, so my scientific training makes it difficult, if not impossible, to accept the teachings of Christianity, said Thomas, a young Asian medical resident. As a believer in evolution, I can't accept the Bible's pre-scientific accounts of the origin of life. And the Bible is filled with accounts of miracles, added Michelle, a med student. They simply could not have happened. So this topic is particularly interesting to me because before I started Northeast Christian Apologetics and before I started doing all this online stuff, I used to work as in nuclear chemistry. And so I'm very familiar with the scientific method. You know, I worked at a nuclear power plant as ending up as the supervisor for Unit 1 and Unit 2 power plants at a nuclear power plant. And so I've done chemistry, I've done radioactive analysis, I've done a lot of stuff, obtaining data, generating hypotheses, getting more data in order to verify the hypotheses, things like that. So I like this topic. I like this a lot. So let's see what happens. The best-selling books by Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, and Sam Harris assume that science is, in general, and evolutionary science in particular, has made belief in God unnecessary and obsolete. Dawkins said very famously that although atheism might have been logically tenable before Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. In The God Delusion, he goes much further. He argues that you cannot be an intelligent scientific thinker and still hold religious beliefs. It is one or the other. To support his thesis, he points out that a study in 1998 showed that only about 7% of American scientists in the National Academy of Sciences believe in a personal God. This is proof that the more intelligent, rational, and scientifically minded you are, the less you will be able to believe in God. Is Dawkins right? Has science essentially disproved Christian beliefs? Must we choose between thinking scientifically and a belief in God? Are miracles scientifically impossible? The first reason that many people think science has disproved traditional religion is that most of the major faiths believe in miracles, the intervention of God into the natural order. The miraculous is particularly important for Christian belief. Christians annually celebrate the miracles of the Incarnation, the birth of Jesus each Christmas, and the miracle of the bodily resurrection of Jesus from the dead each Easter. The New Testament is filled with accounts of miracles that Jesus performed during the course of his ministry. Scientific mistrust of the Bible began with the Enlightenment because the belief that miracles cannot be reconciled to a modern rational view of the world. Armed with this presupposition, scholars turned to the Bible and said the biblical accounts cannot be reliable because they contain descriptions of miracles. The premise behind such a claim is that science has proven that there is no such thing as miracles, but embedded in such a statement is a leap of faith. It is one thing to say that science is only equipped to test for natural causes and cannot speak to any others. It is quite another to insist that science proves that no other causes could possibly exist. John McQuarrie writes, science proceeds on the assumption that whatever events occur in the world can be accounted for in terms of other events, just as immanent and this worldly. So, miracle is irreconcilable with our modern scientific or our modern understanding of both science and history. All right, so like here, this is kind of like like Graham Oppy's view of science, where there is only natural causal entities and there are only natural causal powers, you know? And so when you take a look at that, you know, that assumption kind of is intended to eliminate supernatural causal powers, such as speaking things into existence or rising from the dead, those kinds of stuff. But the thing is that it's too vague. You know, what actually is natural causal powers? Why are we limiting natural causal powers to certain observable phenomena? You know, why are we limiting our our experience of reality to just certain observations that we've had. Here, as the modern scientific method has not been around for very long, and we're still learning a lot about reality. We still have so much to learn about reality. It seems to a lot of people premature to eliminate other causal possibilities when we are so finite in our knowledge. But let's see what Keller has to say some more. McQuarrie is quite right to assert that when studying a phenomena, the scientist must always assume there is a natural cause. And like I said, natural cause is kind of vague. I've had conversations with atheists in which I've had conversations with naturalists that who would include God as part of their naturalism. And so they're like, God is a natural entity, but that's kind of like a monist view of naturalism, which is dealing more with the it wouldn't be called supernatural side, but the more mental side of reality, saying all these physical aspects of reality are just an illusion, and we're all just part of a mental structure. And thereby they would say that their naturalism includes God. And so you can kind of see how this becomes very vague. But that's a problem with philosophy. Or anyway, Keller continues, that is because natural causes are the only kinds its methodology can address. It is another thing to insist that science has proven there can't be any other kind. There would be no experimental model for testing the statement. No supernatural cause for any natural phenomena is possible. It is therefore a philosophical presupposition and not a scientific finding. McQuarrie's argument is ultimately circular. He says that science, by its nature, can't discern or test for supernatural causes, and therefore those causes can't exist. If you can't see it, then it's not there. Well, that's not good reasoning. The philosopher Alvin Plantinga responds, McQuarrie perhaps means to suggest that the very practice of science requires that one reject the idea, e.g. of God raising someone from the dead. This argument is like the drunk who insists on looking for his lost car keys only under the street light on the grounds that the light was better there. In fact, it would go the drunk one better. It would insist that because the keys would be hard to find in the dark, they must be under the light. The other hidden premise of the statement, miracles cannot happen, is there can't be a God who does miracles. If there is a creator God, there is nothing illogical at all about the possibility of miracles. After all, if he created everything out of nothing, it would hardly be a problem for him to arrange parts of it as and when he wishes. To be sure that miracles cannot occur, you would have to be sure beyond a doubt that God didn't exist, and that is an article of faith. All right, so let's highlight this. Okay, this is very important. After all, if he created everything out of nothing, it would hardly be a problem for him to arrange parts of it as and when he wishes. All right, so this is an interesting, this is like a double-edged sword right here. All right, so God, now part of being omnipotent means that God has the power to actualize any potential. Okay, as long as there is a potential to be actualized, and he has the power to actualize that particular potential. All right, and so if we're limiting natural causal powers to certain kinds of powers, like the ability to push and pull and speak and things of that nature, if we are limiting causal powers to those natural causal powers, then miracles would definitely be supernatural, because God has powers beyond just, those kinds of push and pull things. He has mental powers, kind of similar to how we have a power over our imagination. That's kind of how God relates to the physical world, in which God's will, the physical world is a manifestation of God's will or his intellect, and that's where his power is. The problem here is that if God has a power to arrange parts of the physical world as and when he wishes, then this is when people challenge the modern scientific method. If we have a God that can arbitrarily change the laws of nature at his whim, then what good is science? Science then becomes unreliable. And then they prefer what's called the uniformity hypothesis. And this uniformity hypothesis is supposed to promote stability in the universe, but it's actually unjustified. The other thing here, to be sure that miracles cannot occur, you would have to be sure beyond a doubt that God didn't exist. And this is an article of faith. All right, so I'm going to highlight that one in blue. This is really important as well, okay? In order to be sure that miracles can't happen, you have to be sure that God doesn't exist. As long as it's possible for God to exist and it's possible for miracles to occur, all right? As long as there's an entity that is not limited to what's normally associated with natural causal powers, then supernatural causal powers are a possibility. All right, so you have to. So it's not enough to have a lack of belief in God. If you have a lack of belief in God, then you're unjustified in rejecting miracles. If you're agnostic about the God question, then miracles are still a possibility on your worldview. Okay. Something to keep in mind. All right, so let's continue. The existence of God, it can be neither demonstrably proven or disproven. All right. Yes, this is also important too. Like I've said in previous videos, when somebody asks you to present God, he's like, present God to me right now. God is not something that we have the power to manifest ourselves. It's kind of similar to like Voldemort asking Harry Potter to present to him, to have Harry Potter present to him J.K. Rowling. That literally makes no sense. Similarly, C.S. Lewis also said that it would be like Hamlet going up to his attic to find Shakespeare. That's not how you find God. That's not how God works. He's not some sort of physical entity that you can just present. All right, so let's go ahead and continue. But I will add this react real quick because I liked this whole paragraph. This is a well said paragraph. All right, so isn't science in conflict with Christianity? All right, let's see what's going on here. It is common to believe today that there is a war going on between science and religion. One of the reasons for this perception is that the media needs to report news events as stories with protagonists and antagonists. It gives wide publicity to battles between the secular and religious people over the teaching of evolution in schools, stem cell research, in vitro fertilization, and many other areas of medicine and science. These battles give credibility to the claims of Dawkins, Harris, and others that it is either or that is either or. You can be either scientific and rational or religious. Oh, man. Over the years at Redeemer, I've talked to many people trained in science and biology who were very wary of Orthodox Christian belief. One young medical student said to me, "The Bible denies evolution, which most educated people accept. It bothers me terribly that so many Christians, because of their belief in the Bible, can take such an unscientific mindset." His concern is quite understandable. Here's how I respond to him. Evolutionary science assumes that more complex life forms evolve from less complex forms through a process of natural selection. Many Christians believe that God brought about life this way. For example, the Catholic Church, the largest church in the world, has made official pronouncements supporting evolution and being compatible with Christian belief. All right? So let's go ahead and highlight this as well. You do not need to be... you can believe in evolution and still be a Christian. All right. Believing in evolution does not automatically mean that you can't be a Christian. All right. The church actually pushed back on evolution, not because of doctrinal issues, but there were well-informed people who just doubted the theory based off of the scientific data that they had. So there was a debate on it, regarding like the lack of transitional bones and things of that nature. All right, so it's not really a doctrinal thing. There's a lot of hullabaloo about Genesis having to it be interpreted literally. But Genesis has always been a book of debate. Even in the 4th century, St. Augustine said that if you believe in a 7-day creation, then you're crazy. Because it wasn't because it was too short. It's not like St. Augustine was like, God couldn't have created all this in only 7 days. He's like, God has the power to create everything that we see instantly. 7 days is too long. So there's a lot of ways to interpret Genesis, and this is a major reason why I kind of just leave that as a question mark for now. That there is a truth in there that we need to know, but it's not intended to be a scientific textbook. The truth is deeper than the physical that we see. All right. All right, so anyway, Keller continues. However, Christians may believe in evolution as a process without believing in philosophical naturalism. The view that everything has a natural cause and that organic life is solely the product of random forces guided by no one. When evolution is turned into an all-encompassing theory explaining absolutely everything we believe, feel, and do as a product of natural selection, then we are not in the arena of science, but in philosophy. Evolution, as an all-encompassing theory, has insurmountable difficulties as a worldview. We will look at these difficulties in Chapter 9. Dawkins argues that if you believe in evolution as a biological mechanism, you must also believe in philosophical naturalism. But why? The same year that Dawkins's The God Delusion was published, Francis Collins published The Language of God. Collins is an eminent research scientist and head of the Human Genome Project. He believes in evolutionary science and critiques the intelligent design movement that denies the transmutation of species. However, Collins believes that the fine-tuning, beauty, and order of nature nonetheless point to a divine creator, and describes his he describes his conversion from atheism to Christianity. Here, then, is what Dawkins says can't exist. Someone with a firm belief in evolution as a biological mechanism, but who completely rejects philosophical naturalism. Collins, of course, is not alone. And a major reason why Collins rejects naturalism is because of the lack of explanatory scope and the lack of explanatory power. Naturalism has as a worldview, has a very narrow range of explanatory scope, and that's part of why people lean on science, and when they think of science as providing explanations, that it excludes supernatural explanations or causes. It's very narrow. It's unsuitable in most situations to provide explanations of a supernatural nature. Alternatively, as a Christian, or as any kind of generic theist, even a deist, has a wider range of explanations. As a matter of fact, a theist has all the explanations available to them that the naturalist does, and more. So there's literally no reason to be a naturalist, because any explanation that's available to the naturalist is also available to the theist. Okay? All right, so anyway, contrary to Dawkins' simplistic schema, there are many different models proposed about how God relates to the development of the life forms we see today. Ian Barbour lays out 4 different ways that science and religion may be related to each other: conflict, dialogue, integration, and independence. At the one end of the spectrum, in conflict, are both the proponents of creation science and, ironically, thinkers like Dawkins. Each side has bought into the warfare model of the relationship of science to faith. Many creationists' view of Genesis 1 makes any kind of evolutionary process impossible, while the philosophical naturalism of Dawkins makes religious belief totally invalid. At the other end of the spectrum, there are those who believe faith is mainly a private subjective thing and therefore does not speak to the empirical realm at all. In this view, science and religion have nothing to say to each other at all. Barbour himself thinks this view gives away too much and prefers a spectrum of more moderate and complicated approaches in which science and religious faith recognize their respective spheres of authority. It is the conflict model, however, that gets the most publicity. Unfortunately, this view is losing credibility with a growing number of scholars. The history of the secularization of American institutions is treated in an important and influential book edited by Christian Smith. In it, Smith argues that the conflict model of the relationship of science to religion was a deliberate exaggeration used by both scientists and educational leaders at the end of the 19th century to undermine the church's control of their institutions and increase their own cultural power. The absolute warfare model of science and reason was the product not so much of intellectual necessity, but rather of a particular cultural strategy. Many scientists see no incompatibility between faith in God and their work. There really isn't any incompatibility. Sasha says that she's checking in. Thank you. I appreciate that. But yeah, like I said, there are no explanations available to the naturalist that aren't equally available to the theist. The only thing that but there's things that naturalism can't provide that theism does provide, and a major one in my mind is the ability to provide explanations. On a naturalist model, you need to add, like what I discussed earlier, the uniformity hypothesis. Without the uniformity hypothesis, you cannot do science. Okay, there needs to be some sort of regularity. But what I've, and as I've discussed in other videos, the uniformity hypothesis is unjustified based off of the problem of induction. That's a huge problem for naturalism. All right, but on theism, God provides a lot of explanations, even with regard to the time, how time works, temporal becoming, if that's a thing, and things of that nature. There's a lot that theism actually provides. All right, so Keller continues. Two famous studies that support this contention were done in 1916 and 1997. The American psychologist James Luba, let's see if this comes up. Loba. James Loba conducted the first survey of scientists, asking them if they believed in a God who actively communicates with humanity, at least through prayer. 40% said they did, 40% said they did not, and 20% were not sure. In 1997, Edward Larson and Larry Whittam repeated this survey, asking the very same question of scientists. They reported that in the scientific journal Nature that they had found that the number had not changed significantly in 80 years. What then of Dawkins's claim that nearly all prominent scientists disbelieve in God? In The God Delusion, he cites Larson and Whittam's follow-up correspondence in Nature a year later. There, they noted that when they asked the same question about belief in God to members of the National Academy of Scientists, only 7% said yes. Dawkins cites this statistic as evidence that intelligent scientific thinking almost always leads to the conclusion that God does not exist. There are, however, major problems with the way Dawkins and even Larson and Whittam interpret the data from these studies. First, keep in mind the original question posed to the scientists in both surveys. Scientists are asked if they believe in a God who personally communicates with humanity. To hold that a transcendent God created the universe is not enough to be listed as a believer. Any NAS scientist who believes in a God who does not communicate directly with humanity is automatically put into a category of disbeliever. The surveys were only designed to see scientists with conservative traditional belief. Those with a more general belief in God who are screened out by the way the question is formulated. Now, this is very common with these kinds of surveys. The way that they word the question can weed out people unintentionally or maybe even intentionally, depending on what they want the data to look like. So you got to pay close attention to how questions are worded. All right, so Keller continues. Second, Dawkins reads the data as establishing a causal relationship between the scientific mind and atheism. His assumption is that NAS scientists, which is National Academy of Scientists, disbelieve because they are scientifically minded. However, the study does not and cannot prove that the cause of the NAS scientists' belief in God, or what the cause of the NAS's scientists' disbelief in God really is. It could be any number of things. It could not be scientifically related. It could be culturally related. It could be based off of their upbringing. It could be based off of the problem of evil, which is like a moral dilemma instead of a scientific one. There's a lot that goes into this in belief and lack of belief and things of that nature. Alistair McGrath, a theologian with a Oxford doctorate in biophysics, writes that most of the many unbelieving scientists he knows are atheists on other grounds than their science. Many complex factors lead a person to believe or disbelieve in God. Some are personal experiences, some are intellectual, and some are social. Sociologists of knowledge, like Peter Berger, have shown that our peer group and primary relationships shape our beliefs much more than we want to admit. Yeah, this happened to me. When I was in the Navy, I was on a submarine as a nuke, in the engine room, helping out with propulsion, and the division, the nukes were primarily atheistic that I was around, and that rubbed off on me, and it caused me to fall away from the faith for years. Scientists, like non-scientists, are very affected by the beliefs and attitudes of the people from whom they want respect. In McGrath's experience, most of his atheist colleagues brought their assumptions about God to their science rather than basing them on their science. Also, Dawkins gives readers the impression that all atheistic scientists would agree with him that no rational scientific mind could believe in God. But that is simply not the case. Stephen Jay Gould, the late Harvard scientist and evolutionist who was himself an atheist, knew all about these studies, but could not conclude with Dawkins that science necessarily clashed with Christian faith. He wrote, "Either half my colleagues are enormously stupid, or else the science of Darwinism is fully compatible with conventional religious beliefs and equally compatible with atheism." When Gould spoke of half his colleagues, he was probably not thinking strictly of survey data. He simply knew that a great number of his most respected scientific colleagues had traditional religious beliefs about God. One of the reasons Gould does not agree with Dawkins is that he was much more willing to concede that science might not be able to account for everything about human existence to every thinker's satisfaction. Yep. Same here. I think that naturalism completely fails to give any kind of explanation for the human experience. Like, why is it that we exist and we do experience things? If naturalism were true, and it somehow happened to be the case that this world was as uniform as we observe it to be, it would seem to me that I would expect everything in the world to be like the NPCs of video games, that we respond to stimuli in accordance with our programming, and we have no first-person awareness of it. That's what I would expect. I don't understand why we have this human experience on naturalism. I would expect that we would all be philosophical zombies. Nobody would have any kind of first-person awareness at all. But I don't know about you guys, but I definitely do. All right, so Keller continues. Another scholar who makes this point is the philosopher Thomas Nagel, who critiqued Dawkins's approach in a review of The God Delusion in the journal The New Republic. Nagel, too, is an atheist, but thinks Dawkins is wrong to insist that if we are going to be scientific at all, we must embrace physical naturalism, that the ultimate explanation of everything must lie in particle physics, string theory, or whatever purely extensional laws govern the elements of which the material world is composed. He asks, for example, whether we really believe that our moral intuitions, such as that genocide is morally wrong, are not really, but only the result of neurochemistry hardwired into us. Can physical science do full justice to reality as human beings experiences? Nagel doubts that. He writes, the reductionist project usually tries to reclaim some of the originally excluded aspects of the world by analyzing them in physical, that is, behavioral or neurophysiological terms. But it denies reality that what cannot be so reduced. It denies reality to what cannot be so reduced. I believe the project is doomed, that conscious experience, thought, value, and so forth are not illusions, even though they cannot be identified with physical facts. This is why even many atheists believe Dawkins is wrong, that science cannot explain everything, and why scientific thought can be compatible with religious belief. Even though the concept of warfare between science and religion still has much popular credence, we should disabuse ourselves of the notion that we have to choose between the two, or that if you want to be a Christian, you will have to be in conflict with science. A majority of scientists consider themselves deeply or moderately religious, and those numbers have increased in recent decades. There is no necessary disjunction between science and devout faith. Does evolution disprove the Bible? What about the more specific issue of how evolutionary science fits with the biblical account of creation in Genesis 1 and 2? Surely, there we have a head-on collision. No, that's not the case. Different Christian thinkers use all of Barber's models of relating science to faith: conflict, dialogue, integration, and independence. Some Christians in the highly publicized creation science movement take the conflict model and insist that Genesis 1 teaches that God created all life forms in a period of 6 24-hour days just several thousand years ago. At the end of the spectrum are Christians who take the independence model and simply say that God was the primary cause in the beginning the world, and after that, natural causes took over. Other thinkers occupy the central positions. Some hold that God created life and then guided natural selection to develop all complex life forms from simpler ones. In this view, God acts as a top-down cause without violating the process of evolution. Others, believing there are gaps in the fossil record and claiming that species seem to appear rather than develop from simpler forms, believe that God performed large-scale creative acts at different points over long periods of time. A big one that people refer to as the Cambrian explosion. The relationship of science to the Bible hinges not only on how we read the scientific record, but how we interpret certain key biblical passages, such as Genesis 1. Christians who accept the Bible's authority agree that the primary goal of biblical interpretation is to discover the biblical author's original meaning as he sought to be understood by his audience. This has always meant interpreting the text according to its literary genre. For example, when Christians read the Psalms, they read it as poetry. When they read Luke, which claims to be an eyewitness account, does it though? Luke doesn't claim to be an eyewitness account. He takes on eyewitness roles in the book of Acts, but he's more of like a investigative journalist, so they take it as history. One other thing I'm going to note here is that here he says Christians who accept the Bible's authority agree that the primary goal of biblical interpretation is to discover the biblical author's original meaning as he sought to be understood by his audience. This is kind of a modern view of biblical interpretation. In the past, it has been the idea that biblical interpretation is, yes, it's trying to understand what the author intended in the original context in which he wrote it and wrote the book, like the kind of genre and stuff like that is taken into consideration. But you have to also interpret the Bible through the lens of God as well. Like God is also infuses the text with meaning. Okay. So that's part of biblical interpretation as well, as understanding what meaning God provides in the text. And this is often seen in the form of prophecy, especially messianic prophecies. There are many prophecies that happen in the Old Testament that the author may not have initially understood to be messianic prophecies, like the virgin birth. Okay, that's an example of one. All right, so anyway, Keller continues, any reader can see that the historical narrative should be read as history and that the poetic imagery is to be read as metaphorical. The difficulty comes in the few places in the Bible where the genre is not easily identifiable. We aren't completely sure how the author expects it to be read. Genesis 1 is a passage whose interpretation is up for debate among Christians, even those with a high view of inspired scripture. I personally take the view that Genesis 1 and 2 relate to each other the way Judges 4 and 5 and Exodus 14 and 15 do. In each couplet, one chapter describes a historical event, and the other one is a song or poem about the theological meaning of the event. When reading Judges 4, it is obvious that it is a sober recounting of what happened in the battle. But when we read Judges 5, Deborah's song about the battle, the language is poetic and metaphorical. When Deborah sings that the stars in the heavens came down to fight for the Israelites, we understand that she means that metaphorically. I think Genesis 1 has the earmarks of poetry and is therefore a song about the wonder and meaning of God's creation. Genesis 2 is an account of how it happened. There will always be debates on how to interpret some passages, including Genesis 1, but it is false logic to argue that if one part of Scripture can't be taken literally, then none of it can be. That isn't true of any human communication. I myself am very undogmatic about how to interpret Genesis 1 and 2 and evolution. I don't take a hard stance on any of that. I try to keep abreast of what's happening in the conversation, but I don't defend any particular view. I kind of just wait. I'm just waiting. All right, anyway. Keller continues, what can we conclude? Since Christian believers occupy different positions on both the meaning of Genesis 1 and on the nature of evolution, those who are considering Christianity as a whole should not allow themselves to be distracted by this intramural debate. The skeptical inquirer does not need to accept any one of these positions in order to embrace the Christian faith. Rather, he or she should concentrate on and weigh the central claims of Christianity. Only after drawing conclusions about the person of Christ, the resurrection, and the central tenets of the Christian message should one think through the various options with regard to creation and evolution. Representatives of these different views often imply that their approach is the one true Christian position on evolution. Indeed, I'm sure that many reading this will be irritated that I don't take time here to adjudicate between the competing views. For the record, I think God guided some kind of a process of natural selection, and yet I reject the concept of evolution as all-encompassing theory. One commentator on Genesis captures this balance well. If evolution is elevated to the status of a worldview on the way things are, then there is a direct conflict with biblical faith. But if evolution remains at the level of a scientific biological hypothesis, it would seem that there is little reason for conflict between the implications of Christian belief in the Creator and the scientific exploration of the way which, at the level of biology, God has gone about his creating process. All right, so healing the world. I don't want to be too hard on people who struggle with the idea of God's intervention in the natural order. Miracles are hard to believe in, and they should be. In Matthew 28, we are told that the apostles met the risen Jesus on a mountainside in Galilee. When they saw him, they worshipped, but some doubted. That is a remarkable admission. Here is the author of an early Christian document telling us that some of the founders of Christianity couldn't believe the miracle of the resurrection, even when they were looking straight at him with their eyes and touching him with their hands. There is no other reason for this. There is no other reason for this to be in the account unless it really happened. The passage shows us several things. It is a warning not to think that only we, modern scientific people, have to struggle with the idea of the miraculous, while ancient, more primitive people did not. The apostles responded like any group of modern people. Some believed their eyes and some didn't. It is also an encouragement to patience. All the apostles ended up as great leaders in the church, but some had a lot more trouble believing than others. The most instructive thing about this text is, however, what it says about the purpose of biblical miracles. One thing I'm going to note real quick is that the apostles had a tendency when they were told about something that they thought was ridiculous, they thought that the person was just saying things. Oh, you just had an hallucination. You just had a vision. Just like when like Peter was locked up in jail and he miraculously escaped, he literally thought that he was having a vision until he was outside. He was like, oh man, this is actually happening. And then when he went and knocked on the door, the girl a girl answered, saw Peter, and didn't even bother to let him in, and ran to the group of people who were praying for Peter. And they were like, oh, you're just saying things. You haven't seen Peter. So people routinely throughout history doubted the miraculous stuff, so don't be surprised. Don't be surprised that there are doubts. All right. So Keller continues, they lead not simply to a cognitive belief, but to worship, to awe and wonder. Jesus' miracles in particular were never magic tricks designed only to impress and coerce. You never see him say something like, see that tree over there? Watch me make it burst into flames. Instead, he used miraculous power to heal the sick, feed the hungry, and raise the dead. Why? We modern people think of miracles as the suspension of the natural order, but Jesus meant them to be the restoration of the natural order. The Bible tells us that God did not originally make the world to have disease, hunger, and death in it. Jesus came to redeem where it was wrong, and heal the world where it is broken. His miracles are not just proofs that he has power, but also wonderful foretastes of what he is going to do with that power. Jesus' miracles are not just a challenge to our minds, but a promise to our hearts that the world we all want is coming. All right, so I'm going to personally highlight this. I like that. So it's yes, it's true that Jesus' miracles were a sign of his power, of his station, and things of that nature, but they weren't meant to be the core of his ministry. Jesus was not interested in having a miraculous healing ministry. That's not what it was. Those miracles were meant to demonstrate, or meant to be validation of his claims, meant to be validation of who he is, okay? It's a demonstration of power. It's meant to convince people that he really is the Messiah, that he is the Son of God, and they're not meant to be the focus. He discouraged that. He did not like it when people came to him just for the miracles. All right, so Keller does not continue. All right, we reached the end of the chapter, and you know what that means? That means that we get to celebrate. Yeah! Woohoo! Yay, we made it to the end. And if you made it through all that with me, I appreciate it. Great job, everyone. That was a good one. I appreciate this chapter a lot. As someone who has done a lot of science myself back in the day, I definitely strongly believe that science that we experience nowadays, the modern scientific method, the assumptions of it are better ascertained or more easily intuitively inferred when you are dealing with a Christian worldview. Like science has a lot of assumptions to it. And those assumptions are more readily apparent given a Christian worldview. Like, as I've said previously, the uniformity of. Let me hop over to this one. Oops. Yep. Don't forget to subscribe. Let me turn that off. All right. So, the uniformity of the universe, the coherence of the universe, the adequacy of our language to describe how the world actually is. These are assumptions that are more readily apparent given a Christian worldview, as well as our language given mathematics. Some people use the argument that mathematics is abnormally well equipped to describe how the world actually is, and they use that as like mathematics, saying that mathematics is the language of God. These kinds of things are more readily apparent on the Christian worldview, and on naturalism they just aren't. They just aren't readily apparent. When you are saying that there are only natural causal entities and with natural causal powers, it's like, what does that even mean? What does that even mean? Or if you're saying that naturalism just is space-time and energy as we find it, and it's in its different forms, well, that doesn't provide us any kind of explanation for causal powers. Like that leaves open the possibility of chaotic worlds. And if chaotic worlds are possible, then they comprise the vast, vast majority of possible worlds. And so we cannot infer any kind of regularity or coherence or causality. And I think that David Hume does a great job of expressing that in his writings. That if you assume a naturalistic worldview, then you cannot explain causation and you cannot have explanations. But yeah. I appreciate you guys coming out with me tonight. Thanks again for the 100. Let's go ahead and celebrate one more time. Woohoo! Can't believe it. We made it to 100. But yeah. Maybe if we get to 150, I'll do a face review. Oh, there we go. Anyway, all right, enough goofing around. I'll see you guys next week at 6 p.m. on Monday to talk about Chapter 7. You can't take the Bible literally. All right. Have a great week. And thank you for coming out again. God bless. Bye-bye. Hey, before you go, I hope you enjoyed today's enlightening discussion during our Christian Apologetics book study. It's always a blessing to come together to explore our faith and grow in our understanding. Your participation means the world to me, and I'm grateful for your continued support of Northeast Christian Apologetics. Remember, you can stay connected with me and access valuable resources by visiting my website at nechristianapologetics.com. There you'll find a wealth of articles, videos, and recommended reading material to deepen your knowledge of Christian apologetics. If you're as passionate as I am about equipping believers to defend their faith and engage in meaningful conversations, you can also support this ministry in various ways. One way to support this work is through patreon.com. By becoming a patron, you'll have access to exclusive content, early access to our discussions, and a chance to connect with like-minded individuals who share your passion for Christian apologetics. If Patreon is not your style, some people prefer to give me a one-time tip. And if you'd like to do that, then feel free to do so through Venmo or Cash App. But of course, there are many ways to support me. By praying for this ministry, sharing the content on social media, or simply spreading the word about what I do. Every bit of support goes a long way in helping me fulfill my mission. Once again, thank you for joining me today. Your presence and engagement enrich these discussions, and together, we're on a journey to strengthen our faith and share the good news with others. Stay tuned for more exciting book studies, thought-provoking discussions, and opportunities to grow your Christian apologetics journey. I look forward to seeing you again.